Hi guys, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in January. The start of the year is always a busy time for me, moving around, birthday, Christmas, lots of stuff, but I managed to read a fair amount of books at the beginning of the year. It's kind of funny actually. I've always read in like chunks, like I'll read a couple books and like be really into something and then I'll like not read for like a bazillion years. And in my chart you can definitely see that. I just read in these huge chunks and then you can just tell I just gave up at the end of the month. Hopefully this trend doesn't continue in February, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the books I read this month. So the first book I read this month, this year, was Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. I actually only read like the last 100 pages of this book at the start of New Year's, but it was the first book I completed of 2020. Muse of Nightmares is the second and final book in the Dreamers duology. The first book is Strange the Dreamer. I felt very mixed about Strange the Dreamer and I felt very similarly about Muse of Nightmares. I'm not super into the main romance. Some of the side characters ticked me off. The story doesn't really go anywhere that much. There's just something off about this series that didn't really gel with me. I think if I liked the characters, then I would have liked the story and the writing. This series is really a character-driven series, so when you don't like the characters or their relationships, it just kind of falls through. I will say I think I did like this book slightly better than the first one. I liked a lot of the lore and stuff they were covering. It feels like a long time since I read that book and I'm trying to remember my distinct feelings about it. But basically, I gave it like a 2.5 or 3 stars. It's a fine series. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just not particularly for me. The next book I read was The Girl of Fire and Thorns. So I might as well just talk about the whole series because I ended up reading the entire Girl of Fire and Thorns book series. So I read The Girl of Fire and Thorns, I read Crown of Embers, and I finished off the month by reading The Bitter Kingdom. These are all by Rae Carson, and they're kind of older fantasy series, I would say. So it definitely has the feel of a little bit older of a fantasy series, but I don't think that's a bad thing. In fact, it reminded me a lot of one of my favorite series of all time, which is the Graceling series. I feel like this series, tonal-wise, is the first series that's really gotten close to the tone of Graceling. This is a fantasy series with like romance, plot, wars, like all of that good typical fantasy stuff that you think of, but it's really honed in and focused on these characters, their relationships, and this coming of age story of this young princess. And I think that's one of the strengths of this series, is that it's the arcs and everything is built solely around this one character protagonist growing and changing, and it's just so powerful to see this young girl going through this massive character arc. So The Girl of Fire and Thorns, basically about this young princess who's being married off to this king of a neighboring kingdom. She has a lot of self-doubts, especially because she isn't considered traditionally beautiful. She is fat, and this book really deals with this character, you know, that has self-doubts, really coming into her own and discovering herself. And the love interest, whew. I have a very big thing about bodyguard and protected, or like protector, protected kind of thing. Bodyguard, royalty, like that is like one of my favorite things. Actually, if you have any recommendations for bodyguard and like royalty, like that is my thing, so please let me know. But besides that, it's a Latinx inspired fantasy, so everybody is dark skinned. I think overall this fantasy series was doing a lot for its time. It has characters of color, it has fat characters, it has queer characters as well, very small side queer characters, but this series is older and it was doing so much in its time. While this series like touched on some really like major things, and while it had so much great representation, I think because it's an older series you can definitely see some of the flaws, or where it's a little bit, I don't want to use the P word, problematic, but like I think if Rae Carson wrote this series today it would be a little bit different, be a little bit more politically correct. But I think for what she was doing in the time period, like it's so progressive. And I know it's only like 6 to 10 years old, maybe 15 years old, but it just like, you know what I mean, you know? And like overall this story is about one girl really coming into her own and changing and developing and gaining a love of herself. Definitely recommend this if you like the Graceling series, if you like Howl's Moving Castle, has that kind of feel to it with a more epic fantasy scape. Apparently I have a lot of feelings. So the next book I read was a graphic novel. I read Princess Ever After by Katie O'Neill. You're gonna see a pattern pretty quickly. Basically, I've been obsessed with Katie O'Neill's comic books for like ever, and I've seen them and I've wanted to read them for so long. And so I finally used some of my Christmas money and I bought them. Princess Ever After is a very short little comic book about a princess and a princess falling in love with each other, and it's very simple and sweet and cute. I love the art. It was a 4-star for me just because it was very short and I would have loved more of it, but I had a good time. It was very enjoyable and lovely. And then the next 2 books I read were The Tea Dragon Society and The Tea Dragon Festival, both by Katie O'Neill again. I've been hearing talk about these forever and I love the art style. I love the little tea dragons. And so I was so excited to sit down and read these. Again, these are a very diverse, and there's people of color and queer people. And it is a comic book following a fantasy world where there's these little tea dragons, and they're super cute little dragons, and they make tea on their backs, and they're kind of like little cats and puppies, and they're adorable and sweet. So both of those were also 4 stars for me. They were just very lovely, and I want to live in that world. I want more of it. And then the final comics things that I read this month were the Legend of Korra comics. This was part 1, 2, and 3 of Turf Wars, which is the first installment in the Legend of Korra series. I have very conflicted emotions about the Legend of Korra series. That would be like a whole separate video where I could just talk about the positives and negatives of that series, because I do think some of the things that they were doing in that series were spectacular and great, but then some of the choices they made were just like not good to say the least. Anyway, I wanted to read these comics. I love Avatar The Last Airbender. I love reading the Avatar The Last Airbender comics. Maybe as in where I don't trust all the creators on the original Korra series, I do trust the people that are doing the comic. And you know, I love Korra, I love Asami, I love their relationship. That's a big draw for me when I'm going into this series. Avatar The Last Airbender leaves off with just so many places for it to go and grow. The series really does tackle a lot of things, and it's the same with Korra. Korra leaves off and you know there's so much room and spaces for this series to grow into, and so I've always been interested in reading this comic series. I think some of the things that they talk about are so interesting. While I might not like the Korra series show entirely, like I have very strong feelings about the characters in this world, and I love exploring more of it. So if you are a fan of Avatar, if you're a fan of the Korra franchise, or if you're like me, you're kind of conflicted over your love of it, I do think the comics are worth reading. I did have a fun time with them. I gave them all 4 stars, and I'm interested in reading the continuation. I think there's another installment. Okay, that is going to do it for me. There were lots of 4 stars this month, only 1 3-star, which is fantastic, but no 5 stars. That's fine. Overall, it was a really good start to the new year, and I got to read a lot of things that I've been looking forward to for a very long time, so I'm happy about that. So let me know what your favorite book was this month in the comments down below. I'll see you guys later, and happy watching.